And Councillor Weeb, can you hear us okay in the chamber?
Yeah, loud and clear.
That's great.
Great. So we will just jump right in here. So good morning and welcome to the reconvened Standing Committee on City Finance and Services meeting of Thursday, July 22nd, 2021. This committee meeting is being convened by electronic means as authorized under Part 14 of the Procedure Bylaw, the City of Vancouver Electronic Meetings Regulation, and the Order of the Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General of the Province of British Columbia Emergency Program Act, updated Ministerial Order number M192. Committee members are participating by phone, and as chair of this meeting, I'm also participating by phone. For the purposes of confirming quorum, Council, please ensure your video is turned on and that you message the clerk if you need to leave the meeting. Please note, if my connection is lost during any portion of this meeting, we will recess the meeting until my connection is restored. If committee members lose connection during the voting process, we have staff on hand to facilitate getting you back online quickly while we suspend the voting process. The contact information has been circulated to you. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We thank them for having cared for this land and look forward to working with them in partnership as we continue to build this great city together. I also want to take a moment to recognize the immense contributions of the City of Vancouver staff who work hard every day to help make our city an incredible place to live, work, and play. Deputy City Clerk, may we have the roll call, please?
Mayor Stewart. Councillor Carr. Oh, Mayor.
Here.
Okay. Councillor DiGenova.
Present.
Councillor Fry.
Here.
Councillor Swanson.
Here.
Councillor Hardwick.
Present.
Councillor Weeb.
Present.
Councillor Boyle, leave of absence at 9:30. Councillor Dominato.
Present.
Councillor Bly in the chair.
Present.
Councillor Kirby-Young. And okay, Mayor Stewart's on a leave of absence. You have quorum, Chair Bly.
Thank you very much. Following the updated guidance issued on July 7th, 2021, there is a maximum allowable capacity for public in-person participation in the council chamber under the Provincial Health Officer Order on Gatherings and Events. Therefore, public may participate by speaking in person, by phone, or by submitting written comments to Mayor and Council. Virtual participation is highly encouraged as there are capacity limits within City Hall. Speakers should follow along on Twitter at VanCityClerk for updates on the progress of the meeting so they don't miss their turn to speak. Any comments on agenda items can be sent to Council using the web form on the city's website. The link to that form will be tweeted out on at VanCityClerk. I also want to note the City of Vancouver's longstanding commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, including utmost respect for all genders. I remind Council that when addressing speakers and staff, we will avoid using gendered honorifics and will instead refer to the person by first and last name or role or title. We have 3-member motions remaining on today's agenda, referred from the council meeting on July 20th, 2021. If we do not complete the business by noon, we will recess for lunch and reconvene at 1 p.m. Should the business not be completed prior to 5 p.m. today, we will recess for dinner at 5 and reconvene at 6 p.m. I'd like to remind council members that if amendments are brought forward, they must be submitted to the city clerk in final written form before the council member introduces them. Please ensure the city clerk has received your amendment. At yesterday's in-camera meeting, no members declared a conflict of interest on the remaining agenda items. I don't think that is supposed to read at yesterday's in-camera. At yesterday's committee meeting, no members declared a conflict of interest on the remaining items today. Yesterday, we completed hearing from speakers for referred item 7, considering youth housing needs within the city's housing strategy, which was moved and introduced by Councillor Dominato and seconded by Councillor DiGenova. We will now continue moving into debate and decision on that item. And I'm just going to ask that any councillors who wish to enter into the debate can put themselves on the queue. And I'm just If you're at the top of the queue, please feel free to come off of mute. My panel just closed, and so I need to reopen it. Clerks, may I ask you to let me know if there are any counselors on the queue for item 7?
Chair Block, point of privilege.
Yes, please.
Oh, now it's working. I wasn't able to get myself in the panel, but I see I am now. Nice.
Yeah, there might have just been a glitch because it just kicked me out. So I'm just going to. So are you first on the queue, Councillor Kirby-Young?
It looks like it, yes.
Okay. May I ask you to please go ahead and ask the clerks to start your timer, and by then my panel should be back up. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to speak in support of the motion and thank Councillor Dominato for bringing it forward. I think that this is identifies a really critical topic in an area, which is to make sure that youth at risk and youth that have had, already had sort of a tough time, particularly coming out of care, for example, don't fall further through the cracks. And I do think that it's a particularly salient area to pay attention to because, as we heard from some of the speakers yesterday, it can have such a huge impact on people's lives if they can have access to secure housing as a foundation to be able to build a life moving forward. And really make the difference in their potential and sort of living a fulfilling life, or not, honestly. And, as I said, falling through the proverbial cracks. It's also really pragmatic because if we don't identify people early on, they become long-term sort of dependence upon social services and supports in the system, which, over time has a cost, not just to those individuals, but to their potential to society and financially in terms of supporting them. So I think for a number of reasons, it's really important that we do have a lens on this. And I think Councillor Dominato identified that this is intended to really be a lens about it. It's not asking for specific development of new policies in that. It's asked that youth be identified as a need group and that lens be applied within our existing housing efforts and the policy work that is being undertaken. And so I think that's also a pragmatic way of integrating it into the city's efforts. And I do want to acknowledge sort of the speakers and trust that came to speak, as well as Covenant House, who have been very active as well in identifying and raising this issue, and did actually provide a submission to city staff in response to feedback for the Planning Vancouver Together on the housing strategy. Also identifying that this was a particular area of need and showing how, sort of evidencing how impacted youth are by sort of not being able to have homes and have that stable foundation. And so there's a lot of groups, I think, supporting this and working towards it. But I would really like to see us be able to identify this area and have some initiatives or housing projects, hopefully, from nonprofit providers that come forward or units within diversifying units so that some are available for use, some for seniors, for example, so that we actually ultimately over time don't end up with as many seniors that need those services because we are lifting people up earlier in their life. So those are my comments and I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kirby-Young. I believe, is it Councillor DiGenova that's next on the queue?
Yes.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Councillor DiGenova, 5 minutes to the motion.
Thanks very much. I'd like to thank Councillor Dominato for bringing this motion forward. I was really happy to second it. I think that when we look at supportive housing, it's something we've talked about at council a lot. And although it may not specifically be something that we consider to be in our lane as councillors, and I say that because BC Housing and CMHC, and we often partner together with other organizations, but also when we consider supportive housing, I think that there's other ministries that need to come into that too, and that includes the Ministry of Children and Families, and I also think that that includes the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions and the Ministry of Health. And if we truly want to see supportive housing across the board, we need to consider that. And there's different types of supportive housing. But when you have a birthday and you magically turn 18 or 19, depending on where you're living and what the housing needs say, I've even watched children when I've been working with a nonprofit in supportive housing have to change over from MCFD to CLBC, to Community Living BC, and their lives change quite significantly, and they have to move and they have to change from the places they live in, from the homes they've grown up in. And And although this is somewhat different, it's very important. And I think that as we look also at our 4 pillars approach, it's not just about looking at it through the lens of drug strategy. It is about lifting people up, as others have said. I really thought that the speakers were very impactful yesterday, and I grew up having one of my very best friends was in foster care and ran away many times, and has told me and my family to this day how she probably wouldn't be where she is today unless she had a spare bedroom to crash in, and had people who cared about her. But some people don't have that, and that's not even sufficient. So I think that when we consider this and we consider the good work that Covenant House is doing, and I really want to recognize them because I have supported them and fundraised for them and tried to bring awareness to them for many years, and will continue when they have their sleepouts again in person, because I think that it's about bringing awareness to this. And this is an organization that does so much good work in our city, but they can't do it alone. And the other part of this is they provide housing, but we want to have transitional housing also, as these young adults transition into adulthood. And I don't think that it's fair to abruptly just push them into that place. So it's something that I feel very strongly about. I really appreciate all of the good work being done by the organizations and nonprofits, by the housing partners in Vancouver. But in looking at our housing strategy and how we can consider people who need housing and need that support, I appreciate Councillor Dominato's efforts to bring this to the forefront, and I hope that this will be supported. I would assume it will be supported. Maybe I shouldn't say that before a vote. But I would hope that we would all have the same goal in helping to lift up and give these youth and young people the tools that they need to be able to succeed, because they make huge contributions to our society and our city. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor DiGenova. I am having serious technical issues here due to a lack of connection to my remote desktop. So I'm actually just going to ask Councillor Dominato if you would like to close on your motion, but we may need a quick recess to solve this. So Councillor Dominato, over to you, and then hopefully it'll be resolved at the end of your comments.
Yeah. Certainly, thanks, Chair, and appreciate that. And thank you to the speakers who called in late last night. I appreciate it. It was a very long day for both speakers and council, and also to my colleagues, Councillors Kirby-Young and DiGenova, who spoken in support of the motion. I really appreciate the fact that I think this is an issue that I think all of council cares about, because we've often spent many hours talking at council about the challenges of homelessness in the city, as well as housing affordability. And what I was struck with the housing strategy is, while it does recognize that we have particular groups and populations who are more vulnerable, at risk of homelessness, and youth are identified in there, is I really wanted to shift the conversation to have staff reporting back on what are the opportunities that we can focus more on youth, and really looking at it from the preventative lens, and that was sort of touched on by my colleagues. What I have found when I think about all of the rezoning applications that have come to this council that we've approved, while some of them may have been supportive housing or social housing, the vast majority of the time our conversation is centering around affordability and income levels. And certainly that is a part of this conversation when it comes to youth aging out of care, or youth who are vulnerable for other reasons. Is affordability certainly an issue, and that came up in my conversations with organizations like Covenant House, like the Family Services of Greater Vancouver. However, and I think you heard this yesterday in one of the speakers who commented about the fact that you need age appropriate youth housing. And so it's not just about affordability, it's the quality and nature of the housing we're providing, and is it appropriate to youth? And the youth that spoke yesterday, or former youth in care that spoke yesterday, talked about that is that being youth appropriate, what type of wraparound services are there, what kind of supports are part of that, is there an ability to stay for a couple of years to establish some stability and social connections within a community. And so to me, I wanted to shift the conversation away from not just simply talking about affordability, but what type of housing are we delivering? And are there opportunities to engage with organizations and collectives like Trust and the development community and builders and explore ways to deliver housing that's appropriate for youth as part of some of the supportive housing projects that are coming forward. And so it's really to bridge that gap and make sure that this is at the forefront because we do know that youth, like in our last homeless count, were 9% of individuals living on our streets were youth. And so I think there's definitely a need there. And I'm hoping that we can focus and laser in on this going forward, not just in this term, but in future terms of this council. I really appreciated that not only Trust came out to speak. I had met with them last year, and they include representatives from MCFD and the Ministry of Health and others. But also that the representative for children and youth also acknowledged in writing and sent a letter around to council about the importance of this. And it's not that housing falls to the shoulders of cities and municipalities. We absolutely recognize that BC Route Housing is playing a role in this and is a leader in this. But at a local level, we can play a role and be an enabler and open doors for more youth-oriented housing. And so appreciate that we've been able to have this conversation at council, and I hope for council support in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dominato. Our fabulous IT staff, I don't want to interrupt the flow of this particular decision, so I apologize, but our IT staff have done a fabulous job and gotten me up and running. And so with that, I see there's no one else on the queue, so we can move to a vote on this item. And that motion passes with unanimous support. Okay, thank you very much, Council, for your work on that first item of business today. All right, so the next referred item is item 8, previously motion before, planning to support distributed ambulance services in the City of Vancouver, which was moved and introduced by Councillor Fry and seconded by Councillor Dominato. And we do have speakers for this item. Of course, our first speaker is Troy Clifford. Speaker number 1, Troy Clifford. Are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay, great. We can hear you. You do have 5 minutes to speak to council, and you can go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to have me on today and speak to this motion or speak with some background. And I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm Troy Clifford. I'm the provincial president with the Ambulance Paramedics of BC, which is the union and professional body that represents 4,500 paramedics across BC and dispatchers. And as you know, or you may know, I'm a 33-year working paramedic in the interior, and I have a secondary residence in your community in Vancouver, in Southeast Vancouver. And so I know a lot about ambulance services around the province, and I was very pleased when Councillor Fry contacted me earlier this month with respect to this motion and asked for feedback and history and insight. And so we've had some very good dialogue going back and forth. And I understand that there will be some potential small amendments to the motion and the whereas coming under your procedure. So I will leave that up to you guys. So I won't speak to the changes that we've discussed, just to tweak a few things that I think would be better wording to more meet the objectives that he's been put forward. And I've also had some discussions with Councillor DeGenova, who has been working with Councillor Fry about some of those amendments. So those two have I've been working closely with to help with this motion. And I'm pleased to, on behalf of our 4,500 members across the province, support this motion. I think it's a well-needed initiative. Although ambulance services don't fall directly under the municipalities, you have obviously a vested interest for your patients and your public in your communities. And as you'll see through the whereas, Councillor Fry has articulated some of the history of what's happened with diminishing services and stations within the lower mainland, but particularly in the Vancouver core, where we're down to a minimal amount of calls and or stations, and that's really affected our ability. If you look under number 6 in the whereas, where you talk about the 8.59 minutes, and you may have heard the minister last week talking about what that 8.59 minutes, and what that means is it's a national benchmark that says in metro areas under the most critical calls, reds and purples we call them, but that means anybody names critical interventions, and those are first responder calls that the Vancouver Fire Services are sent as first responders to assist on. And what that means is in the 90th percentile, it is expected that ambulances will arrive at a critical intervention call within 8.59 minutes. And we know that that threshold has not been met in the Metro GVRD area, but particularly in the Vancouver. And that's directly related to what this motion and is all about, is a decreased amount of stations. For instance, we don't have, if you look at under 7, we lost the station in the West End quite some time ago that was amalgamated with our downtown East Side station. And anybody that drives around the city knows that you can't get from the downtown East Side to some of the corners of the West End in 8.59 minutes. So that just by itself sets you up for, as well as losing our station on the South Slope in the south side of Vancouver, which was moved to the Richmond station. That was our 244 that was at 57th and Cambie. We lost our station at Vancouver General, which was an advanced care station. And then recently we've lost the two stations, or been closed. When we say lost, I mean closed. The Boundary station at Boundary and just off Hastings, which is technically in Burnaby, but it serviced the northeast corner of Vancouver. And then the Boundary and Vanessa station was also closed and moved to our new super station, as you will call it. We'll call it down on Imperial and Kingsway. So that's moved farther away from the southeast corner of Vancouver. And then, of course, there's one station that isn't listed here that we have our UBC station that services some of the west side of Vancouver as well, which is on the UBC grounds right beside the hospital. So when we talk about those response times, that's key to making sure that we meet the needs of the public and, of course, our patients. Right, and that's really, when we talk about the West End, I think it's still one of the most densely populated areas in North America, and we don't actually have an ambulance station in that jurisdiction, which is quite tragic. And really, the background on this is we haven't had the planning and the capital infrastructure put in place to do this, and I think that's why this motion is easy to support for me, is that working together we can look at better ways to utilize things, and that's where the motion comes forward. So I just want to say that I could go on for hours. Obviously, I'm very passionate about ambulance services and public safety and first response, but I think overall this is a great motion, and anything we can all do to make an ambulance get to a patient in a timely fashion, or a 911 call answered in a timely fashion, is what we all should be objective. So we all have a vested interest.
Okay.
And
Troy, I'm gonna have to. I know you're wrapping up, but we're well over the 5 minutes at this point.
I'm
so
sorry.
That's okay. I know it's hard for you to see the time. You do have a number of questions from councillors, so I'm happy to move ahead with Councillor Kirby-Young. Questions of speaker, and you have 3 minutes, Councillor Kirby-Young.
Thanks, Chair. And good morning, Troy. Thanks for being here. I have a couple of questions I want to get into in my 3 minutes. And the first one is, noting that the motion notes that most of the ambulance properties are leased typically, and in city's case with fire halls and that, they're on sort of city-owned land. And so, just wondering if you can comment as to why it's been a lease model. Has there ever been land purchased to utilize that, or has it always been a leasing approach?
So I believe that's one of the amendments that may be coming forward by Peter or by Councillor Fry. In that we have had a mixed bag, probably the best way to describe it, of different facilities around the province. Some were owned, some are leased, some are co-shared. There's some municipalities, I think like Chemainus and some of the smaller communities have tri-services shared facilities, police, fire, ambulance. So there are, I guess the best way to describe that is they're mixed. But I think it changed in the, I want to say the early 2000s where they moved away from owning really anything. And that was to coincide with the early 2000s when we went into the health authority versus being a standalone commission. And I think that took away a lot of our ability to do those things. So,
okay, I just
I don't know
trying to get my head around that model and how that would work in terms of leasing space, say in conjunction with a fire hall and that, where we also try to collate things like housing services with some of the new halls. Related to that, and Emotion already notes that some of that changes were due to management decisions, et cetera, and obviously there's been a lot going on lately with respect to response to the recent provincial announcement. Do you see the philosophy changing with the announcement from the province in terms of either the model, the amount of resourcing towards stations, or the model of, leasing, owning, or what they look like? What's sort of the current state based on the recent announcement from the minister?
Absolutely. I really believe that the move towards the new model with a board that oversees this will have the direct, moving us to our own entity within the Provincial Health Services Authority will allow better integration with municipalities like on initiatives like this and better long-term planning. Because part of that, he announced he wants a 3-year plan that addresses all the issues around that we've been challenged with. So I think putting in this challenge or this new structure is really a move forward for better oversight and better administration of specifically things like facilities, location. And the minister announced that as directly part of this, moving towards 8.59 as the benchmark. And that includes, and that directly relates to where stations are located. So I see there's a very close correlation. There's municipalities like West Van that own the station in West Van that are proposing right now building a multi-purpose facility, like sort of like your 54 in Kerr one with your fire hall. It would include an ambulance. So those are kind of ideas that how it could work, and whether the ambulance service leased off or get a shared building. Those are why I think that you want to keep all the doors options open. Right. But I think those are. I think that answers your question. I hope.
It does. That's my time.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young. Councillor Fry, questions to the speaker.
Sure. Thanks, Chair. And thanks, Troy. And just want to, off the top, thank you and your members for, service to Vancouverites and British Columbians, and, recognizing that this recent heat dome event was extraordinary. But certainly I undertook this because I had outreach from first responders in the city's employ, fire and police, expressing their frustration with the how you guys are being hamstrung by a lack of resources, and then diving deeper into the status of these various spaces. Are you aware of any pressures on some of the leasehold ambulance stations we have in the city right now? Like
yes, I am.
Those leases.
Yes, for sure. I know that. Sorry, I cut you off. Did you finish the question?
Yeah. Go.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. The Arbutus station has been on sort of a challenge lately, and I'm not sure what the most recent thing is, but I believe the lease status of that is up in the air. Obviously, with the 57th in Cambie came upon quick, and that's why they had to move it. So that's been those stations that have shut down, with the exception of the Boundary and the one just off Boundary in Hastings, which is still there. We've seen really the lease and the facilities. As you know, our station in the West End used to be 42 with Richards and Drake is still a parking lot. So that's it just comes down to how valuable the land is, and you guys know that better than I do. And so these owners of the properties are saying, well, I can get more money or more development out of these properties. So long term, we know that the population demands are not going to go away in the city of Vancouver, and the demands on the ambulance services we know go up 6% every year on average across the province. So I suspect in your community it's going to be even higher than that. So I think To answer your question, yes, the demands on our stations that we don't own or have a shared long-term arrangement with are vulnerable for sure, and we've seen that already, and I suspect we're going to see that more. And I know the one at 43 in Arbutus is definitely one of those ones that they've been concerned about.
Okay. I'm pretty much out of time for questions, but in the last 30 seconds, I know Richmond has moved ahead with this. I know you mentioned West Van. Are there more of these co-locations happening in Metro that you're aware of?
Just 15 seconds, Troy.
Yeah, I don't believe there's any on the books right now imminently in the Lower Mainland, but they are being looked at around the province in some community. I know Creston, and some of your colleagues at UBCM would know that better, but I know that Creston was one they were looking at. So there just depends on when the leases come up and when there's initiatives by the municipalities, I think.
Great. Thank you very much for that. That is Councillor Fry's time, but you have more questions. Councillor Carr.
Yes, thanks so much. I very much appreciate you taking the time in your day to come and speak to us on this issue. Thank you. And for the good work of you and your members. My first question is really arising out of the comment you made about the West End. I'm a West Ender, and I know how packed it can be during rush hour and how difficult it is to get through town. So have you kept any data on whether or not coming from the downtown east side into the West End is exceeding the 8 minutes, 59 second guideline?
Yes, so it's funny you mentioned that, Councillor Carr. We don't specifically keep it as the union, but the data is all available through the BCEHS, and it must be reported. And actually, that was part of the minister's announcements. Was some of our recommendations are about doing an environmental scan exactly on that, because they have that data and they reported out recently. I don't have the Vancouver numbers before me, but recently BCEHS reported out that in most spots, and I know Burnaby was over 11 minutes average, and I can't remember the numbers. Sorry, Langley I had, because the communities were really asking those questions. So I can get those numbers that were recently put for you. But I believe Vancouver is also over that 8.59, particularly over the last year or two. So yes, so those
I
numbers
would
are
appreciate
available.
that information. Okay, so we can
Yeah,
follow up later. Great,
Yeah,
good, thank you. The second question I have is I had heard, and I don't know if they were just rumors. I'm really interested in the veracity of them. That during the heat dome or heat wave, that one of the problems was with ambulances not able to get to some patients in critical need was a backup at the hospitals. I mean, I heard the story that at one point paramedics, ambulance paramedics were treating people in hallways. They weren't able to get in to see anybody into the hospital yet. I don't know if that's true or not. So I'm looking for, I think, response from you on that.
Absolutely. Hospital delays, handoff delays, there's a lot of different terms for them, have been a challenge for a long time within our profession and service. Particularly during the heat, we've seen incredible additional calls, over 25% more than we've seen normally. We've seen our out of service level. So everything was a factor in the delays for sure during the heat that we're exposed with. But hospital delays are a big part of our ability. And what I mean by hospital delays is the ability for paramedics to get into the hospital and hand off their patient to the healthcare professional through triage and that into the emerge. And what's happening, because emergency divisions are so busy, is they can't process us through and release the paramedics in a quickly manner, which adds to our delays in getting to calls. So I know you probably have a lot of time.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. That is the end of the 3 minutes. But you do have more questions, so perhaps there'll be an answer there where you can finish that thought. Councillor DiGenova.
Thanks so much. And my panel's not working, Chair, so indulge me here in that I can't see my time.
You
Let
bet.
me know if you can't hear me. Thanks so much, Troy. And I just want to echo the thanks that Councillor Fry had shared to you and your members who are on the front lines every day, and especially during COVID. You didn't have the option to work from home, and I just really want to acknowledge that and the good work that you and your members do every day and how difficult that must be. So I just wanted to say that. And then I did have some questions specifically more about the motion, and maybe these are some of the amendments you had also alluded to. But in consultation, if policy options are going to be worked on by our staff, is this something that, the ambulance paramedics of BC, your employer, as well as fire should be at the table for, in your opinion?
Oh, absolutely. I think any consultation we have, and you guys have heard what thank you, Councillor De Genova. I appreciate the comments you've all made here, and obviously, by my talking, you guys know I'm a verbose guy, and I have lots to say and talk about, and I'd be happy to engage all of you on a lot of this stuff. But I think that goes to what you're asking. I think that any consultation we can have, you can see that I have obviously good insight, and my colleagues at Vancouver Fire would have good insight. They deal with it. We're side by side at all our calls that we go to in the community. The BCEHS has definitely. So yes, I think the consultation and input would be valuable, and I think that's where we can move ahead collaboratively, where we can put the responsibilities on those that are and accountabilities, and ultimately that gets us to better care for patients and the citizens of Vancouver.
Thank you very much. Also, just one
more
quick
minute.
question with my minute. I was going to say that, but
great.
time's been taken up by reminding me. So, Troy, I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about the culture and the importance of having fire and paramedics having separate space. Just quickly, is that important to you? That it would be close by, but
yeah, absolutely. The proximity, we're all in public safety together, police, fire, ambulance. So I see us all as public safety frontline. Paramedics have a different job in our clinical side of things and our healthcare side of things. And we know through North America that being closely associated is a very important thing for public safety and what we're talking about here. But also there's completely different services that require their own space and independence. We've found problems where challenges have happened where it's just not the best to put everybody in one room, and people need their space. It's a tough job for all of us, and I think we can balance the need for efficiencies, but also the independence that's needed for the professions and the jobs that they do. So I think that's a very critical part of this.
We'll have to leave it there.
Thank you very much, Troy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Weeb.
Yeah, thanks, Troy, for coming today. My first question is, recognizing we've continued to increase the medic component of the fire department, as well as we're seeing a lot of mental health cases being dealt with our police department. How do you see this expansion of paramedic services help support those two departments, and how do you think we could better align our community services and public safety altogether?
Well, I think that the new structure that's been put in place by the minister is definitely consistent with the OHR reports. And I'm going to send you all a number of reports that speak specifically that coming out of the reviews and the Auditor General's report that Councillor Fry mentions in his stuff. And I forwarded that to him. So I'll forward all that stuff to the council. I think you'll find it very interesting and addresses that component of it, how we can better integrate. The collaboration that we talked about just previously is really important. But also, I think that when you talk, terminology is important. That first responders, police, fire, they all have very distinct roles in the continuity of care, if you will. From the key focus is that first responders are primarily there for providing those critical interventions and those highest level calls on support for paramedics to treat and transport. So they're very distinct roles, and I think understanding that, better training for those critical interventions, what they're specifically looking for and what they need to do while they're on scene or providing that support as a first responder role is critical for the integration, how we can better do those sorts of things that support the first responder program and the paramedics on scene and that. So I think there's other ways we can do this, which we've been talking for a while, is the call mitigation, where we talk about our community paramedic program that's been successful across the province. Integrating that into Metro, where you have ways of supporting the communities, the opioid crisis and the homeless are all areas that are being put into the system. Mental health are being put into systems that don't need an ambulance service or don't need to go into health service. So we need to do it better in the community support, and we have ways of doing that with paramedics in conjunction with other public safety agencies. So I think those are some of the suggestions we put forward, and they're really good options that can work towards those solutions.
So I'm interested. Could you send information on what programs have used peer services or community-led services to deal with some of these interventions that are currently going to ambulance or fire police?
And we just 15 seconds for your response, Troy. Sorry.
Absolutely, I'll forward a bunch of information on that, and we can have a further discussion offline for sure, Councillor Weeb.
That'd be amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Weeb, and thank you very much, Troy, for fitting in those answers into such a small window of time that councillors get. That is the end of your question queue or question list here. So we do appreciate you coming to speak to council today.
Thank you for having me on. Okay,
great. So that does actually conclude our speakers list on this item. So we're going to move into discussion. I see there's a number of councillors on the queue, but we're going to go on the question queue. I'm going to move to the main queue. So if you could put yourself on that queue, that would be great. Okay, so I see we've got Councillor Fry first on the list for discussion. Please go ahead, Councillor Fry.
Thanks, Chair. Actually, I submitted some amendments and with apologies, there was a system glitch with the submission thing, so a lot of the comments from staff didn't come back until after we entered it. So
understood. So I'm going to move us to an amendment queue, and then I'll ask you to introduce your amendment. Okay, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. And it's a couple of amendments to the resolution enactment clauses, and then there's a couple to the whereas, which as our procedure
Just a point
dictates.
of privilege.
Yes, Councillor DiGenova, point of privilege.
I'd like to go on the amendment queue, but Councillor Fry's not on yet, and I didn't want to trip that up.
Okay, so Councillor Fry, if you go ahead and put yourself on the queue to speak to your motion. Okay, there we go. Go ahead.
Great, yeah. So a couple of amendments to the enactment clause, a couple of amendments to the whereas clauses, which as procedure dictates we have to do after if this passes. The first is really just clarifying that the idea of co-location is not sort of within the organizational structure of, say, the fire department, but rather in the physical built form, similar to what they've done in Richmond, which is fantastic. It's a separate leased entity that is attached to the fire department. The city of Richmond built it and leases it out to the ambulance service. But it's secure in its tenure, and I think that's the critical distinction. So just to be clear about co-location, also recognizing very explicitly that ambulance services are the responsibility of the provincial government, and so this isn't about downloading to us, but really it's just a reflection of our values and goals in the Healthy City Strategy, which is equitable access to high quality social, community, and health services. And recognizing, of course, we have an aging population. We have a lot of concurrent health issues going on in the city of Vancouver, not the least of which, of course, the opioid poison drug supply overdose crisis. And that these are critical infrastructure pieces that we, if we can help support as a city of Vancouver, I think we should, for the benefit of all Vancouverites. The other two, whereas I'll just quickly knock off the whereas ones, just so that we don't have to waste time when we get to that. I had incorrectly identified fire response as paramedics. They are not. They are first responder services. And I gapped. I guess I was thinking too much of David Eby when I wrote Attorney General instead of Auditor General. And that's a big shout out to our Attorney General, who's doing a great job. Thank you to him, and thank you to the Auditor General as well, of course. Anyway, correcting both those in the whereas.
Okay, great. So as you already stated, we're going to deal with the amendment, and then we'll deal with the whereas at the end of the debate and the final vote on the motion. All right. So, Councillor DiGenova, to the amendment.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to really appreciate and thank Councillor Fry for these changes. I will be supportive of the amendments. I think that they were briefly spoken to by Troy Clifford, the president of the Ambulance Paramedics of BC, and also noting that I think it is important that in any policy options that our staff were to come up with, um, that those policy options would include input and feedback from not only the ambulance paramedics of BC, but their employer, BC EHS, so BC Emergency Health Services. That would also include Vancouver firefighters and their local 18, as well as Vancouver Fire and Rescue, who, yes, technically are part of our staff, but I think it's really important that that's explicitly mentioned in the motion as well. I think it's really that idea of nothing about us without us. And if we're looking at providing emergency services with more tools, and similar to the previous motion we just discussed by Councillor Dominato, it's not maybe our responsibility to do all of this, but whatever we can do in considering the decisions that we make at the City of Vancouver, if we can do more to help emergency services to function and operate more smoothly and give them more opportunities to locate throughout our city, it's a win for everyone in our city. So really appreciate those amendments by Councillor Fry, and sorry to have bothered him with so many emails on them, but I do think it's really important that they're at the table for this. Also noting, that I did feel satisfied that this would not be our responsibility as a city, but again, this is looking at when Vancouver Fire, that is a part of our organization, moves forward, maybe there's opportunities, and I wouldn't want to miss those. So thanks, Councillor Fry, for these amendments, and also thank you for the motion. Really appreciate this.
Great. Thank you very much. So seeing no further comments or councillors on the queue, we can go to a vote on this amendment. Councillor, okay, great. So that motion passes with none in opposition. Just noting for the clerks that Councillor Boyle has joined the meeting and had voted in favor and now is marked as absent. So just to make sure that we do register Councillor Boyle's vote in favor.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair Bly.
You're welcome. Okay, so moving back to the main queue. Councillor Fry, you still have the floor.
Sure. Thanks, Chair. I'll just speak in closing and recognizing that this is a critical infrastructure gap that is unfolding. And I spent a little time with some of the folks down at the 248 Hall when I was preparing this, and just talking to some of the frontliners. And they're working hard and they are burning out and they're feeling sort of underappreciated. And this is a confluence of a variety of issues. But I couldn't help but notice at the 248 Hall on Cordova Street here in the downtown east side, there was vacant lots for sale on either side of the station. And of course, we just passed a pretty significant land use change for the DEOD that may well lead to some kind of purchase of that lot or the selling of that lot to build something great like social housing, or who knows. But the fact remains that we would potentially lose that station. Similarly, as Troy mentioned, the one over at Arbutus and 14th, we're seeing all sorts of new development happening along the Arbutus corridor that we can expect will only increase with the subway arrival. And of course, the station right by City Hall and Robson Park is, of course, part of the Broadway corridor planning. And we can also similarly anticipate that there will be far more valuable land-intensive use of that spot than a single-story ambulance station. So I think this is a really critical kind of conversation to be having. And this is, I will add something that I've discussed with colleagues at the UBCM, and this is a concern that is rippling across the province. So the kind of time is now, too, for the province is definitely paying attention and recognizing this is a gap and recognizing that this is something to address. And they've appointed former Vancouver Police Chief Jim Chu to lead this work. And I am hopeful that we might be able to really see a new, really thoughtful approach to locating distributed ambulance services in our city. The notion that South Vancouver is currently being served by Richmond freaks me out completely, because that means that they have to get there by bridge, which seems like a very unsustainable practice. So the time is now, and again, I just want to end by really thanking um, the ambulance paramedic workers who really are doing some extraordinary work, and it was very illuminating to spend a little time with them at 248, and just the extent to which folks are burning out, and it's a very tough job, and they're not our employees like the police or fire, but they are serving our people, and we owe them a debt of gratitude for that.
Great, thank you very much, Councillor Fry, for your comments. Over to Councillor DiGenova. Oh, actually, I see Councillor DiGenova is now off the list. So Councillor Dominato, over to you.
Sorry, Chair. I was just trying to come off mute there. My apologies. Yeah, just in brief to, I don't know if there's any further amendments, but just to speak to the motion, to say that I'm certainly supportive of this motion, and I think that we know, I think collectively, how critical the BC Ambulance Service is to our city and to our residents. And while it is managed in the authorities at the provincial level, our frontline staff through the ambulance service are doing yeoman's work out there, um, and we certainly, as we've seen with the opiate overdose crisis, I think there's a lot of trauma involved in responding to some of these cases, and that our paramedics are stretched as it is. But I think that this conversation around infrastructure and co-location of services and how we ensure that our residents are better served in the city of Vancouver is a really important one, and obviously very timely in light of not only opiate overdose, but it was pointed to the heat wave and the challenges there, but vital service to our city, vital service to our citizens. And I appreciate that Councillor Fry has brought this forward, and that and I hope it'll be supported by Council, and that we can support a stronger service for both paramedics and our residents. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Councillor DiGenova. Or sorry, Councillor Dominato. Councillor DiGenova, you're up next.
Thanks very much. I spoke to the amendments, but I really wanted to take a moment to thank all of our emergency services and first responders. I know from the work that I do with Honor House, it's near and dear to my heart, but it's given me the opportunity to meet many paramedics across the province and even beyond, and other emergency services. And to say that their job is difficult, and to say that their job is hard, and to say that they don't for them, what I've heard is they take it very personally when they can't meet the needs of their patients. And I think that it was said very eloquently by the ambulance paramedics of BC President Troy Clifford on behalf of his members, that this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to meet the needs of their patients and serve their patients well. And whatever we can do to help that in just considering or offering or working with the provincial government. I don't see this about funding, but I really do see this about supporting our emergency services. And when they're well supported, our city is well supported. I also just wanted to talk about, the fact that we did recently see calls for ambulances that weren't able to get there. And that is not the fault of paramedics. I'm not pointing fingers. I think that instead of pointing fingers, our time would be better served as to see what we can do to advocate. And I'm not suggesting we do that right in this motion, but I think that this is an advocacy motion also. But I would, go further even maybe in the future to advocate that we do work with the provincial government to find ways. Yes, funding is their responsibility, but maybe there are things that we could be doing as a city to be more supportive. And I think that this motion identifies a way forward and some considerations for that. And what's more important, when you're in distress, when you are in need of an ambulance, there is nothing more important than that. Public safety, personal safety. We're so lucky to live in Canada compared to other countries where an ambulance is going to come. especially in BC. An ambulance is going to come regardless of whether or not you have health insurance. So I think that that's very important to point out, and just want to recognize that, and I'd said it before, but during COVID-19, our ambulance paramedics were on the front lines 24/7, serving the city of Vancouver, as were our firefighters and police and other emergency services and healthcare workers. Many people didn't have the option to work from home, so I just really want to acknowledge that and consider, all of this baggage that they carry around with them, the things that they do see every day that I've heard from them. I can't even imagine, and I don't want to some days. But I do really respect, and I want to make sure that we do what we can to help people in the city of Vancouver, and helping fire and ambulance paramedics to find better ways to help them serve people. I'm all in for that. Thanks.
Thanks. Councillor Carr, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I really want to thank Councillor Fry for bringing this motion forward, and thank also the emergency services first responders who do absolutely critical and yeoman service for us at great stress. This council is really unique in that we, throughout our term, have really been in the midst of crises. The opioid crisis has only accelerated, especially under COVID, the COVID pandemic, the heat wave. I mean, and I really want us all to think about the scientific reports we're hearing in the media, that these kinds of crises are only going to accelerate and become more frequent, especially ones related to climate change. So the efficient and the efficient delivery of emergency services, frontline first responder services, is critical. It's unfathomable for me to realize that South Vancouver is being served from an ambulance station in Richmond, given the potential for. I mean, we are also in an earthquake zone. It's just not disaster smart. So I really hope that that this motion can spur a rethink on how we ensure our services are well located geographically, have secure locations, and are well integrated. I mean, the residents of this city, the people who live and work here, absolutely rely on it.
Thank you very much for your comments, Councillor Carr. That brings us to the end of the speakers list for this item, so we're going to move to a vote. So we're voting on the motion as amended. And that motion passes with unanimous support. So as we go back to the main queue, I will ask Councillor Fry to consider putting himself back on the main queue in order to move the whereas.
Thanks for keeping me on my toes there, Chair. Appreciated. Yes, if we can move those two amendments to the whereas, please.
And that will take us to an amendment queue, yes. Okay, so Councillor Fry, if you could please put yourself back on the queue.
Yeah, and I covered this earlier. Basically, it's my correction of Auditor General from Attorney General, and recognizing the role of fire services, not paramedics per se, but emergency first response.
Great, thank you very much. Is there any discussion on this amendment queue? Seeing no councillors on the queue, we're going to go straight to a vote on the amendment to the whereas clause. And just waiting for a couple of councillors. Councillor Hardwick and Councillor Hardwick. There we go. Okay, great. So that passes unanimous as well. So we have a completed item there on item number 8. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Council. On to our final item of the day, which is referred item previously motion B5. So now item number 9, planning for extreme heat and air quality mitigation in Vancouver, which was moved and introduced by Councillor Fry and seconded by Councillor DeGenova. And we do have our first speaker on the line, Robin Chan.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, we can hear you. So thank you very much for coming to speak to council. You have 5 minutes and you can start now.
Thank you, Chair Bly, Mayor and Councillors, for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Robin Chan, and I'm the co-chair of the Vancouver City Planning Commission. I first want to acknowledge that I am sitting on and the Commission's work takes place on the unceded and shared territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Commission to ask you to support our motion, which was put forward by Councillor Fry to refer our July 5th memo to staff for consideration and report back. As you know, the Planning Commission's role is to advise Council on planning in the City of Vancouver. The Commission centers justice, equity, decolonization, and inclusion as foundational to our work. The VCPC memo on extreme heat and poor air quality reflects this. The recommendations prioritize solutions for low-income and poor, disabled, racialized, marginalized, vulnerable, and older people who have been impacted by the structural inequities within planning, who are most at risk of serious illness or death due to extreme heat and poor air quality, and who are often unable to access the existing heat mitigation and clean air programs. As the climate emergency worsens, we can expect more and frequent severe heat waves and air quality warnings. The VCPC memo contains practical and common sense policy changes that can be implemented quickly and that can be embedded into policy over the long term. All of these recommendations should be applied with an intersectional disability analysis. The recommendations encompass multiple city departments and include short-term, my daughter's gonna cry, and include short-term things like ensuring more temporary accessible washrooms are stationed throughout the city, ensuring there is more shade-covered seating, and distribution of emergency planning materials in multiple languages in Braille and with image descriptions. Longer-term solutions include design standard changes to allow for more overhangs, removing barriers for intergenerational housing, and allowing multifamily buildings off of arterial roads with poor air quality. I can speak personally to how some of the recommendations in the memo would have impacted me. I live in nonprofit rental housing with my family, and my landlord has housing all over the region and lots of resources. However, although city communications before and during the heat dome event indicated that work had been done with nonprofit housing providers to reach out to tenants and provide cool spaces within buildings, I can attest that none of that happened within my building. My neighbors and I relied on our own group chats to check up on each other, but we knew that this wasn't available or sufficient for many people in our building who are elderly or who don't speak English or who may not know many others in the building. In the end, my apartment was over 35 degrees inside, and my 6-week-old daughter's face and chest were covered in heat rash. My family was fortunate enough to find and be able to afford a nearby hotel room for 2 nights. But that is not a practical or sustainable solution for my family, nor is it a practical or sustainable alternative for good public policy. Council has adopted a robust climate emergency policy, but with a new climate and new emergencies, we need new responses. By having plans and a framework in place, like recommended in this memo, we can avoid the fatal and devastating consequences that we saw last month when 808 people died in this province from heat. We need to recognize that one-size-fits-all climate policy will not work for elders or for people who are unhoused or for people with disabilities. We need to make housing survivable by setting up high-risk people to stay safe at home. And we need to act now before the next heat wave and before the wildfire smoke blows this way. The Park Board is to staff and will be hearing back on the recommendations made within. The VCPC asks that City Council do the same. Finally, I would like to show my gratitude to Commissioners Gabrielle Peters and Amina Yassine, who co-authored this memo, and for putting their trust in me to be the VCPC speaker today. And I would like to thank Councillor Fry for his support in bringing forward this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. You do have questions, so if you would remain on the line. Councillor Carr, over to you for 3 minutes. Councillor Carr, just check your mute. I know, double muted sometimes. Yeah.
Indeed.
Okay.
Thank you. And just my thanks to you for coming to speak to us, and also all of the commissioners on the Vancouver City Planning Commission for putting together this excellent report. So a couple of questions. It's clear, in terms of inequity in the city, that we have a tree canopy that is inequitably distributed, much more in the west side of this city. So I noticed that some of the recommendations required, for example, or suggested changing the nature of our sidewalks so that there wouldn't be the tree roots getting in the way, wider sidewalks. Is it also different species? And is there a sense that there might be particular kinds of locations for the kind of benches you're talking about under tree shade? What about small local pocket parks? Was that part of your discussion as the commission?
I can't speak to tree species, but I do know some wonderful researchers at UBC who have been working on tree canopy for a long time, Dr. Shepard.
Right.
In terms of where shade needs to be located, in a previous life, I worked for an environmental nonprofit that studied or talked to people in the downtown east side about having more trees in places where people line up, for example. So making sure that along sidewalks where people are waiting to get food or water, there is shade. In terms of benches, certainly under trees on the sidewalk, but also in the memo we do reference that within parks or grassy areas, many of those benches are not accessible to people in wheelchairs or who use mobility aids, and so those benches should be made more accessible so that people can access the shade within parks.
Right. Okay. A second question, because I only have 3 minutes. A second question has to do with the point you make about central heating and indoor plumbing having been like standard for wealthy people, and we're looking at high indoor air quality and energy efficient air conditioning. You don't specifically say that it should be climate smart, such as air-to-air exchanges, heat pumps, and the vulnerability if we're hooked into a increasingly vulnerable hydro system. So potentially putting solar panels, for example, on roofs to enable that. Was that part of your discussion?
Just 20 seconds.
We didn't get into a specific type, but I definitely take that point into consideration, and hopefully that's something that we could speak to staff about if this motion is approved.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Councillor Carr. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks, and also really want to share my appreciation for you, Robin, and for Amina and Gabrielle and the whole the work that's gone into this so far. I'm curious to hear. Seemed to me in reading the report pretty clear that a number of the recommendations cross jurisdictions, and it gets us into this challenge where when a number of governments are partially responsible for something, no one is totally responsible for it, and things fall through the gaps. So I'm curious to hear what recommendations you might have in terms of how that gets better coordinated, how the city plays a role in that, in making sure that sort of the buck stops somewhere, and things actually happen beyond just saying the right words in response, that we actually act.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we do recommend the creation of a workforce that particularly includes, obviously, the province, the city, the health authorities, park board, and school board, but also that centers the people that we specifically mention in the memo, people who are disabled or racialized, low income, seniors, people in social housing, so that their needs are centered within an intergovernmental approach. Because we do know, obviously there's no one size fits all solution. And so being able to pull a group like that together, we hope the city would take the initiative to start that, and then work with the various parties that I mentioned.
Great. Really appreciate that. And again, all of the time that you and many others have put into this.
Thank you, Councillor Boyle. And thank you very much, Robin, for coming to speak today. There are no further questions, but we appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
Next, we have Speaker Ash Peplow Ball.
Hi, Mayor and Council, and thank you for having me today. My name is Ash Peplow-Ball, and I'm speaking on behalf of Women Transforming Cities. I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and I would also like to acknowledge the lives that were lost in the most recent heat wave. I'm speaking in support of the motion today and to urge all councillors to take this motion very seriously, and it sounds like you are. I was really glad to see this motion on the agenda and the Planning Commission's really rapid prioritisation of this issue, as this most recent heat wave has highlighted just how unprepared the city and its residents are for more frequent and more extreme weather events. And like the previous speaker, I had friends with newborn babies that checked into hotels because they were unable to keep their baby cool, friends without fans and air conditioners in very hot, poorly ventilated apartments who slept on their balconies or who pitched tents in local parks if they didn't have an outdoor area. I know people that paid 5 times the normal price for portable air conditioners and fans. I had a friend that went swimming at Jericho Beach because they could not cool down and they ended up really sick and with their body covered in blisters because of the E. coli levels in the water. And in constant discussions with Vancouverites during and after the heat wave, I just found that people were very unsure how to stay safe and cool, and they kept expecting to receive really clear information from council or from provincial government or wherever it might be about what to do, and that never came. And as you can probably hear from my accent, I'm Australian, so I felt like I knew a little bit more about how to stay cool during the heat wave, and that's something that people on the coast here in Canada haven't had to deal with before. This motion speaks to actions that can be taken to support communities that are made vulnerable during periods of poor air quality. And as someone who has asthma, when I think about the next few months and how much we have left of summer, I'm incredibly anxious. My rental apartment does not have good ventilation, and I'm not sure what I'll do during periods of prolonged smoke. But I am privileged and able-bodied, and I can drive myself to malls or to libraries or check into a hotel if I need to. I just purchased a new air purifier, which I know is a luxury that so few in Vancouver can afford. I'd really like to address a few points in the motion that I think are really important. I think relocation plans, including supporting people who are unhoused, many of whom are seniors and people with a disability, to move to safe areas during extreme heat and periods of poor air quality, ensuring that accessible public buildings, including schools and rec centres and libraries, are set up as cooling centres and that there's transportation to and from these places for people who need help getting there, that facilitating matching between people that are isolated and people that can support them to get supplies is a fantastic idea, ensuring that building standards that include the ability to maintain high indoor air quality even during times of poor outdoor air quality, and that air purifiers can be provided to residents with low-income residents, priority given to people who are disabled. And I just really want to emphasise that all of this incredible work by the Planning Commission and if Council supports this motion today requires a really strong communication plan to ensure that the community groups that need to know about the actions that are being taken can hear them. And that means, like the previous speaker spoke to, being available in multiple languages where they're already receiving information on social media in rental buildings from trusted media sources. And I would really also like Council to consider what the role of the city is in supporting workers who are impacted by extreme heat and poor air quality. I have friends who work in hospitality that are casual workers that lost shifts during the heat wave in June because they worked in kitchens and the cafe closed. And these issues disproportionately affect racialised women and gender diverse folks because they continue to be the majority of workers who earn the minimum wage in BC, and missing a day's pay does make a big difference. And secondly, the city needs to consider how you can appropriately fund and support spaces like libraries and rec centres if they do need to continue to provide additional services to people during periods of extreme heat and poor air quality. There's an extreme urgency for Council to act on the issues outlined in this motion, and I hope that they can be considered in an expedited fashion considering the challenges that we might face in the next couple of months. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Ash, we appreciate you coming to speak to Council. You've clearly stated your perspectives and there are no questions for you today, but we do appreciate you coming. Moving on to speaker number 2, Quinn Lawrence.
Yes, Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Quinn. Thank you very much. If you wouldn't mind just letting us know if you're a resident of Vancouver, and then you're please go ahead and share your comments.
I am not a resident of Vancouver. I work in Vancouver on policy and accessibility.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
So, yeah, I'm coming to council in support of this motion. I know that it was worked very hard on by the VCPC. And I would like to highlight a few things in particular. First, that in January of 2019, Vancouver did declare a climate emergency and recognized that the climate change put a lot of stress on communities affected by systemic vulnerabilities and inequities, and that they were at the greatest risk in these situations. Second, that 808 people died of sudden deaths in the week of the heat wave, which was 4 times the usual amount provincially, 4.5 times in Vancouver, which really, I think, shows a lack of infrastructure for supporting people who are at the greatest risk for sudden death in unexpected or unprecedented climate differences than what we've seen before. I would really like to highlight that this entire report is based in, sorry, I just lost my train of thought, but this entire report is really meant to be based in accessibility and equity, and that's highlighted at the start and throughout. And that means that everything that is implemented really needs to be in conversation with people who are the most vulnerable. And in the short term, things need to be implemented as fast as possible so that we don't lose ground in responding to this climate crisis, or more ground than we've already lost. But in the long term, really making sure that people are consulted and that the best recommendations or the best responses do take place. Really, I know that the VCPC really is trying to focus on people who slip through the cracks of responses, and that includes people who have to stay inside, who don't have alternatives or transportation or community and family to turn to for things like air conditioning and air purifiers. And that this really needs an organized and immediate response from council and from the city. And yeah, I guess I would like to close saying that this is really a start, and this motion moving forward would be a beginning to this work. But everything that is recommended needs to be built on and continued. And yeah, I just really hope that city recognizes that and does their best to coordinate with those, as you said before, those conflicting kind of jurisdictions, provincially and municipally, trying to advocate for residents, even if it is not directly in municipal purview. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Quinn, for coming to speak to council. There are no questions for you, but we do appreciate hearing your perspective. Okay, next we're going to move to speaker 3, Joanna Gra.
Hi there, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. If you wouldn't mind letting us know if you're a resident of Vancouver, and then please go ahead and start.
Okay, I am not a resident of Vancouver, but I do work in Vancouver. So I'm just going to start. I don't actually have anything prepared today. I want to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation.
Joanna, can I just pause you for one moment and ask you to speak closer to your microphone? It is a little hard to hear you.
Is that better?
Oh, that's much better. Great, thank you.
Okay, sorry. So I'll just keep going then. I am speaking in favor of this motion. I think it's really fitting that this follows a conversation with or about paramedics, especially considering how much of that conversation. I mean, I know it wasn't directly revolving around the heat dome, but it's still featured pretty quite a bit in that conversation. And I think this is almost a logical progression of that conversation. I don't think there's any reason to not support the motion, this motion, not the paramedic one. That's a different one. All of the suggestions that are in this planning motion are not only reasonable, but they're necessary. So as the last speaker was saying, as the climate changes, I mean, the city declared a climate emergency. As the climate changes and those changes accelerate, I don't think I don't think the city has time to wait and to try to study and, you know, take all this time to implement these changes. All of the suggestions are going to help everybody, and the focus on with an equitable lens on all of these is just makes it so crucial to be implemented. So, like I said, I don't have anything prepared, but I just wanted to call in and say that I strongly support this motion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Joanna, for clearly expressing your support. There are no questions for you, but we do appreciate you coming to speak to council.
Thanks.
Next and finally, we have speaker number 5, as speaker number 4 has withdrawn. So speaker number 5, Amrit Rande.
Yep. Hi.
Hi. If you wouldn't mind letting us know if you're a resident of Vancouver, and then feel free to start your comments.
No, I'm not a resident of Vancouver. I did live in Vancouver for a time when I attended University of British Columbia, but I do have friends and family that I care for that live in Vancouver.
Great, thank you.
So hi, my name is Amrit, and I live in so-called Abbotsford, BC, on the unceded territory of the Stalo Nation. This meeting is taking place on the unceded and stolen lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I just want to bring to your attention as well, right now at Crab Park, the VPD, Park Board, Park Rangers, sanitation workers, and animal control are violently displacing unhoused people on these stolen lands. This comprehensive list of recommendations was created by both Gabriel Peters and Amina Yassin of the Vancouver Planning Commission. These co-writers of this memo have lived experiences that connect them to communities that are among the most vulnerable to these extreme weather events. The lack of urgency regarding this motion and how it's last on the agenda is frustrating. This motion is all about urgency and being proactive about the climate crisis and not reactive like we always have been. I fully support motion B5. The City of Vancouver rightfully recognized that we are in a climate emergency and called it that in January of 2019. However, since then, the work that needed to be done to help communities made marginalized and made vulnerable properly adapt to the climate crisis did not occur. And according to the Global News BC, as of July 16th, 2021, over 800 people were killed during the week of the heat wave at the end of June. In the Vancouver Coastal Health Region, 202 people were killed. That is up from 45 in the same week in 2020 and is 4.5 times higher than the 5-year average for the same week. And then there was an article from CTV News just yesterday, July 21st, 2021, entitled "Early Info Shows BC Heat Wave Death Toll Likely Much Higher Than U.S. Neighbors." And it talked about how the temperatures were similar, the response from residents were identical. So why did British Columbia see so many more suspected heat-related deaths from last month's brutal heat dome than Washington and Oregon? Washington had 112 people die in the population of 7.6 million, and Oregon had 115 people die with a population of 4.3 million. And officials there have already provided information on the ethnicities, living situations, and zip codes of the deceased. So, it goes on to say while Metro Vancouver health authorities enacted a high heat alert, they didn't publicize that the designation was unprecedented and high risk. Meanwhile, the city of Seattle didn't mince words. Excessive heat can be a hidden killer, reads the first line of its section on excessive heat. While BC municipalities enacted their heat wave plans, opening cooling centers, activating sprinklers in parks, and providing tips on how to stay cool through their social media channels, websites, and press releases, none of them offered overnight air-conditioned accommodations for seniors or those struggling in the heat. These deaths were all preventable if the city had implemented measures like all the ones listed in this motion. And I guess I'll just focus on a couple here. One, all work based on equity and accessibility, like all measures like tree planting, placement of water fountains, pools, water parks, and other infrastructure in the short and long term. It must prioritize historically underserved areas and populations that have been harmed by systemic oppression, inequitable policies, and wealth inequality. And then there was an article from the Tyee titled Vancouver's Shady Inequality, which highlighted how the poorest and most underserved communities in Vancouver were also the hottest, while the wealthier, whiter, and resourced communities were cooler. This was called the urban island heat effect because these underfunded communities have less trees and tree canopy for shade, and all the buildings and roads absorb heat, and there's no place to lower body temperatures. Then another important point in the motion was poorly housed. People in social housing, people inadequately housed or living in congregate care face particular risks, like small units, lack of private outdoor access, and then people with particular health conditions who face extreme risk during periods of extreme heat and or lower air quality are not properly housed if they're not provided with air conditioning and air purifiers. This is so important because we have the BC CDC tweeting out recommendations to seek cleaner air or buy ACs and masks. This completely ignores the fact that disabled people, disabled seniors, those without a vehicle or can't drive, people with chronic illnesses or pre-existing medical conditions might not be able to simply find a location with clean air, especially when public health emergencies call for people to stay inside. The communities that are made most vulnerable, which include Black, Indigenous, racialized people, disabled people, seniors, the working class and working poor, unhoused people, and others generally don't have the funds to be able to purchase this life-saving equipment. The City of Vancouver, the province, and Vancouver Coastal Health must work together to ensure these residents have air conditioners and air purifiers. And housing standards must also include...
Emmet, that is the end of your 5 minutes.
Okay.
Did you have a closing statement?
All right, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We do appreciate.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say.
I just want to allow you a few seconds to wrap up.
Okay, yeah. So I just wanted to reiterate that all these recommendations should be implemented immediately.
Great. Thank you very much. We do appreciate hearing from you today. And you have expressed yourself clearly. There are no questions for you, but we do appreciate you coming to speak to council. Okay, so we are over to, that's the end of our speakers list, council. So we are now on to debate and decision. And I see Councillor Swanson. Go ahead, Councillor Swanson.
Yeah, I was actually on the Planning Commission for 3 terms in a previous life. And I actually think this is the best thing that the Planning Commission has ever done. It's so really important and so timely. During our heat dome, a person died in my building, even though I live in a co-op and we have a Helping Hands committee and they were checking on vulnerable people in the co-op. I have a friend and a person in her building died too, even though they do have an air-conditioned common room, but it was locked. And as I sat in front of a fan with my frozen tea towel around my shoulders, I thought of the folks in the SROs on the high, hot floors with no fan and no freezer. It's definitely a rich-poor issue. If you have air conditioning, you're okay, and if you can't afford air conditioning, you're not. So I think these are really good recommendations, and I really think that Amrit, the last speaker, was right. This is one of the things that we have to do, and we have to do it fast. I think we can see by the mortality stats that, when that many hundreds of people die over one day, there's definitely something wrong and definitely something has to be done. So, yeah, I think we need to implement this right away and not put it off for months and years. Um, we need something in case we get another really hot day this summer. We need to look at that weather report and go right into action ASAP to make sure that people that don't have air conditioning can be protected. So yeah, thank you so much to the Planning Commission and Councillor Fry for bringing this forward.
Thank you, Councillor Swanson. Councillor Fry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Also, really grateful to the Planning Commission for bringing this forward. It's really fantastic work. I actually want to cede my time, though, to read the letter that we received from Gabrielle Peters. They were instrumental and did so much work in preparing this, along with Amina Yassin. But through some wires crossed, were unable to speak. They weren't able to get on the list, and I just feel that Gabrielle offers some very thoughtful perspective, and I thought it would be important to read this out for the record. So if Council will indulge me, I am reading this letter from Gabrielle Peters. My name is Gabrielle Peters, and I'm a settler living and working on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. As a commissioner on the Vancouver City Planning Commission, I acknowledge planning's role in colonialism and am committed to learning, actively working for, and being guided by reconciliation. As a disabled person, I know disability itself to be a colonial construct created to categorize, rank, exclude, and otherize. May my words here today remind us all to recognize our relationships, interdependence, and responsibility to each other, to this planet, and life on it. When was the first time you heard the words climate change? How old were you the first time somebody told you the Earth was warming, that weather would change in dangerous ways, and that we needed to act to stop it? When was the first time you heard the words extreme weather? I tried to remember the first time someone told me of the danger we had brought upon ourselves. I couldn't. So this made me curious enough to Google when it all started. According to an article in Scientific American concerned about the impact of human activity on the planet, dates all the way back to ancient times. But it was 1896 when a Swedish scientist first raised concern about the effect burning fossil fuels would have on the Earth's atmosphere. By the 1930s, it was noted that the temperatures of the last 50 years were warmer than those of the previous half century. As the decades passed, the stack of evidence grew with more sophisticated tools for documenting and projecting. This is where we as humans excelled, proving that what was happening was indeed happening, documenting our own downfall. Where we failed was deciding to use the information to create a different future. It is beyond absurd for any member of any level of government in this country to say that our recent heat wave came as a complete and unexpected surprise. None of us knew the specific dates it would occur, just as none of us know when the next one will. But we did know that extreme heat and poor air quality were part of our present and future. Once again, we failed to do what was necessary with that information. As a result, 808 people in this province died. I wish that as humans we had nearly as much shame for not acting on something that is scientifically predicted as we seem to have comfort with excusing ourselves for not doing so after. I wish that we were afraid of not doing enough of what needs to be done as we were of doing one more thing when we were 100% certain can be proven as absolutely necessary. I wish that we could all sit here for 808 minutes of silence and spend even 1 minute thinking about each of the people who died during the heat wave. Along with Commissioner and Urban Planner Amina Yassin, I wrote this memo and received the unanimous support and endorsement of the entire Commission. We both brought our educational learning, our professional experience, and our lived experience to this document. It is certainly not incidental that it was written by a black woman who is a renter living in an urban heat island and a white disabled woman living in social housing and below the poverty line. Our communities are disproportionately harmed by results of climate change. We hope you will read it. We hope you will be the political leaders who understand the need for air conditioning and air purifiers in housing the way previous generations' leaders understood homes needed central heat and indoor plumbing. We hope you will act now to save lives. To bring it back to where I began, I would urge this council to consider the role of colonialism in bringing us to this moment. We mined the earth and pumped toxins into the sky. Under a dome of boiling hot particles, too many of our neighbors exhaled their last breath, waiting for their calls for help to be answered. It is a disgrace, a travesty, another crime in a long list of crimes, and we must not allow it to happen again. Please use this information to create a different future. Acknowledge the injustice and inequity of our city and the death sentence, leaving people with resources with nothing more than the words of advice, telling people to do what they simply can't possibly do on their own. Be leaders that leave no one behind. And that is from Gabrielle Peters.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fry, and also perfectly timed. I'm happy to have heard those comments read publicly, so appreciate that. Councillor Carr.
Thank you. I've already thanked the Vancouver City Planning Commission, and I'll just thank them again for this incredible work. I have to echo Councillor Swanson's point that this is just really remarkable piece of work by the Commission. Just to say thank you again to Councillor Fry for bringing it forward on behalf of the Commission, and really urging Council to understand the importance of this work, that staff should report back on the short-term and long-term strategies and recommendations, that we have just come through the heat dome crisis. And I mean, I don't remember the exact time, apropos the letter that Councillor Fry put out, I don't remember the exact date when I first learned about climate change, but I do remember writing educational materials about it in the 1990s, and like it was not on very many people's minds at that point at all. And now with the heat wave we've experienced, hearing the media consistently hosting experts who are saying it is happening so much faster, accelerating and deepening in terms of impacts than have ever previously been predicted. I reported to this council a year ago, actually before the pandemic, about a trip I took on behalf of the city and Metro Vancouver to a climate conference in Berlin. And I remember relaying to you the most shocking paper delivered by a scientist at that conference, which was about the predicted increase in temperatures in the Eastern Mediterranean, predicting temperatures of 50 to 60 degrees by 2100. Lytton hit 50 degrees centigrade during the heat wave. Everything we can do as a city to prepare residents to be safe during this and to mitigate at the same time is absolutely crucial. I'm also hopeful that the staff report, and I'm not sure how to make sure that this happens, but to make sure that staff who are working on our Vancouver plan with a fall focus on complete, equitable, and resilient neighborhoods, including preparing for climate emergencies, that this information from and direction from the Planning Commission gets incorporated into that, and just reminding councillors that we're going to be playing a role as councillors in hosting a number of those public events, 5 workshops that our city staff have suggested. And we have an opportunity to invite in speakers at that time, and potentially this could be, one of the issues or subjects that we choose to move forward with. So again, thanks to all involved, and it is an urgent situation where political leadership, is particularly critical.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carr, and over to you, Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. That was so well said by both of my fellow councillors. So I'll just echo those thanks and reiterate the importance of us taking action on all of these fronts. This report is is incredibly well written and powerful, and we as elected leaders hold the power to implement or not many parts of it, both in terms of the ways that we can mitigate protect the safety of folks as we experience more extreme weather events, and also the seriousness and urgency with which we tackle climate, as others have said, so that we don't see as many of these events in the future. Those are challenges that we need to take very seriously, and receive this report for the good work that it is, and then honor it by following through on it. And so I hope that we do that both in how we vote today, but also in the many votes that come and the work that is required of us to live up to the challenges that we're faced with as elected leaders. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Boyle. Councillor Wiebe.
Yeah, it was a powerful report. I really appreciate everyone that was behind making it happen. I really thought about the speaker that said it was even not a priority today because it's the last thing on the item, last thing on the agenda today. Just recognizing that a lot of this work, we keep getting pressure from the public, and we really need to move quicker. I've been on the Person with Disability Advisory Committee for 7+ years now, and I've been hearing so many of these concerns of people being left stranded, people not being able to get warm or cool depending on what happens, and that we're not taking care of each other. We're not connected as a community. Some of the pictures that have gone out about the urban heat effect, we've seen those at Park Board since 2016 when we were putting together the Vancouver plan. So for over the last 5 years, I've seen those maps of areas of the city that have under 5% urban forest cover. And today we just got a draft from Metro Vancouver talking about going to 40%. We have a lot of work to do to bring back our systems in the city to kind of make sure that everyone and all residents are taken care of. And so I really appreciate this pressure. I really appreciate the commission bringing this forward, appreciate Beef Fry, and I know we all care as a council, and I look forward to seeing what we can do in the next year to really deliver on action and implementation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wiebe. And seeing no other councillors on the queue, we're going to move to a vote on this report. Thank you, Council. That passes with unanimous support. And thank you very much to our speakers that came to speak to that item and the discussion. So with that, this concludes item 9 on the agenda and also does complete the standing committee portion of this meeting. We do have Deputy Mayor Boyle, who is with us to complete the business of the day in council. So I'll now pass the chair over to you, Deputy City Clerk, to walk us through the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Bly. We will now convene in council to deal with the recommendations and actions from the Standing Committee on City Finance and Services meeting from yesterday and today. Deputy City Clerk, may we have the roll call, please?
Mayor Stewart on a leave of absence. Councillor Carr.
Here.
Councillor DiGenova.
Present.
Councillor Fry.
Here.
Councillor Swanson.
Here.
Councillor Hardwick.
Present.
Councillor Wiebe.
Present.
Councillor Boyle in the chair. Councillor Dominato.
Present.
Councillor Bly.
Present.
Councillor Kirby-Young.
Present.
The meeting has quorum, Deputy Mayor Boyle.
Thank you very much, Deputy City Clerk. Council, we now need a motion to adopt the Standing Committee's recommendations for items 1 to 9. Moved by Councillor DiGenova, and do I have a seconder?
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Wiebe. Thank you very much. All those in favor say yay.
Yay. Yay.
And all those opposed, nay. Thank you. The motion is carried unanimously. Would someone like to move the motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
For the summer.
Second.
For the summer until September. Thank you, Councillor Hardwick, and I think I heard Councillor Dominato second. Great, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, Council, and thank you, staff. Enjoy a bit of a break.
Have a wonderful summer, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you,
Have
staff.
a great break.
Bye.
Thanks, staff.
I'm gonna miss you guys. Have a great summer.